Transportation Committee, because I have some transportation items only that I'd like to get rid of if there are people here that are just for that item. So colleagues, on consent, those in the Transportation Committee, who do we have here?
Nobody.
Well, then we'll just go with, here comes Mr. Weezar. So we have Mr. Weezar here. Mr. Weezar, come on up. This is on consent in transportation. I don't see Mr. Koretz. Is he coming?
He is. So is Mr. Labange.
And Mr. Labange as well?
Yes, sir. And Mr. Parks.
And Mr. Parks as well. So we're going to be pretty good. I'd like to quickly go through those as soon as we have a third member. Then
Yes, sir.
I have the committee, and I don't have a third member yet. I'm waiting for either Mr. Koretz or Mr. Parks, correct? They're both on their way up. Okay. And this is number one. Okay. While we're waiting for them to come up, just curious, I see a Ray, F-A-D-A-L-I. Where are you, Ray?
It's J.
That's a J? Okay, and are you a city employee?
Yes, sir.
And do you want to speak on what issue?
On specifically Commuter Express 423.
Commuter Express 423.
23.
Okay, can we grab the department head and talk to you right now?
If you don't mind, Council Member, I have already approached them many times, and I have not gotten anywhere.
Fine.
For my last result.
That's cool. Okay. So then we'll have you come up and do that. Mr. Parks has just arrived, and Mr. Labange has arrived.
Good afternoon.
So we're in full shape. Transportation Committee, just to get some items out of the place before the joint meeting happens, I'd like your support, colleagues, the four of us here. That's Mr. Weezar, and Mr. Parks, and Mr. Labange and myself. And that is on consent, item number 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9 are on consent on transportation.
Just a quick, who's paying for the signs on number 5? Is that funded out of the department, or is it your district? Do we know? Regularly funded by the staff, or do you have to pay for it?
Good afternoon, council members. Robert Underlun. The signs would come out of the department general fund account.
That you have signed money for?
That's correct. We have signed
Thank
money.
you so much. And what was the last one? 6 and what else?
6 and number 9. 9 is Weezar Koretz motion. This is a request for proposals.
Yeah.
To study the implementation of a bike-powered pedicab service.
And how about a bike rental place over at the Alvera Street, Mr. Weezar? We got that going?
Yes, I'd love to do that. Let's get the pedicab thing going. We'd love to do that.
Good, let's do them both.
Okay, so it seems to be unanimous unless Mr. Parks wants to say anything. Okay, so on consent, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 9.
Mr. Chair, item number 5 should be amended to instruct the request the city attorney to prepare the appropriate ordinance to implement that one, so as amended.
Right on. All right, so moved by the Transportation Committee. All 4 of us.
Number 8
Okay?
made it. I like number 8.
Are we done on that consent? Okay.
How about consent on 8? That's a pretty simple one.
Consent on 8 is a
Look,
pretty
simple
simple
thing.
one. Note and file, Labange Rosendahl.
I don't want a note and file.
I think
want
the
you-
department had some, they wanted to talk about that.
Got it.
and-
Okay, good, thank you.
So we'll wait for that later,
Got it.
Tom?
We got it, that sounds good.
Okay. Because that's not for the joint committee, and we'll save it for later. Okay, anybody else want to make a comment on that sense? Now, what about the public comment, the general public comment? Sir, come on up. We'll get you up there right now. Ray. Okay. And there's another one. Oh, Glenn Bailey for general public comment. And then there's also SEYEDJAHANSHAN last name Samar. Come on up. Okay. All right, these are three general comment questions before we get into the joint meeting agenda. Okay, you're up first, Ray.
Yes, sir. My name is Ray Jadali. I've been riding Commuter Express 423 for the past 20 years.
How many years?
20 years. To be exact, 23 years, sir.
What's your driver's name?
That is a good question. They keep changing every day. That is one of the problems.
All right, one second.
I'm glad you asked that question. So basically, there's two problems with that Commuter 423. One is basically the operation, which I don't want to get into it, but mostly is a problem with the DOT. We had 3 buses nonstop, which they would go from downtown Los Angeles to Topanga Canyon. They eliminated the 3 bus on the complaint of one individual passenger. After deletion, they added 2 buses to Thousand Oaks and 1 bus to Encino. I asked all the DOT staff for the survey they done. It was not complete. Survey was not distributed to everybody. I have more than 45 signatures in my hand of the people that complain about DOT and the way they done it. My question is that, as a member of the City Council of the City of Los Angeles, if you want to build a library, you would rather build it in Manchester in your district, correct? Why the DOT provides a service for Thousand Oaks and eliminating the service from the LA, from Woodland Hills, Topanga Canyon, Winnetka? If the City of LA pays their salary, don't you think they're obligated to provide a service at the first place to their own constituent? And why are they eliminating a service from Topanga Canyon, Winnetka, Woodland Hills, that area, and providing it to Westlake and Thousand Oaks, and only they provide the survey for Thousand Oaks and Westlake area? They never gave us the survey that get an input from us. I got 45 people that they signed it in the bus. If I can do the survey in 2 days, they should have done a better job.
Okay, do you have the 45 names?
Yes, sir.
with you? Okay, could you pass it to the city so we can make copies of it and pass it around? And I'd like to do that right now. Let's get that around. And I'd like to instruct DOT to look at all this data, especially look at the petitions that have been signed. You've heard the discussion here in the room from the citizen explaining his concerns, and I want you to take a meeting with him, set this meeting up as you're walking out of the room here so that we can follow up, and then I look forward to you coming back and telling us where we're at.
Thank you, Councilman.
Okay.
I just also suggested
Oh,
that they
please.
notify the new councilman-elect's office of the 3rd District, because this comes out of Topanga Plaza.
Yes, sir. They eliminate.
That Mr.
Excellent idea, and
Bloomfield.
let's do that as well. Get that information that way.
Good.
Very good.
Thank you.
Would I need to give my name to anybody, Councilman?
We'll get it, there, we'll make
We'll
sure you
get
get
all that
that.
that way.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your
Thank
help.
you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate you
Mr.
coming
Bloomfield.
before us.
For having me. Thank you, sir.
You're up.
Yes, sir. My name is Syed Jahan Shah Samal. I came here to say hello, how are you? First of all. Number 2, discussing about the bus stop issue, which is Westwood and Massachusetts, and northbound Westwood at Santa Monica, which is important for elderly disabled men and women who cannot walk very long way north of Santa Monica Westwood, coming south on Westwood and catch the metro at the corner of Santa Monica and Westwood eastbound. Anyway, there is another location is Westwood northbound at National. When my mother coming with the green bus, she wants to get out by the wheelchair to catch the blue bus. Blue bus does not stop there. They are claiming the bus stop is too short. In order, the bus stop needs to be increased up in order to park and pick up the load and go. Another issue is Rapid 7 Santa Monica Blue bus. I called Mr. Paul Casey. He said that LADOT does not let us cooperate with us to stop at Pico and Beverly Drive, and there are 3 hotels and the numbers of clinic, office, doctor, which we go all the time there, and then we cannot get with the Rapid 7. And Rapid 7 come more than regular 7. So in order, we need a stop for Rapid 7 and those issues which concerning. Thank you very much.
Mr. Koretz's office, I'm assuming we discussed this with him offline.
I'm sure we would be happy to continue to discuss this with them offline.
Okay.
Well, may I suggest
Okay.
Pam O'Connor, because the Rapid 7 is the blue bus, right?
Yes, yes.
We're not blue bus people, but we like Santa Monica.
Of course.
So Pam O'Connor is the mayor or council
Sure.
member?
Yeah.
MTA board member, we could direct you there as well. And I just want to say this is a model for all of us. A young man comes and testifies about better service for his mother. You're a good boy.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
The issue is only blue bus stop there, no metro, sir. The
Yeah, but the
Mr.
blue bus is
Pompey
Santa Monica.
claiming that
Gotta-
LADOT does not let us to stop there, right there. He
Good.
come Beverly Drive.
We're going back.
And I appreciate you coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosendahl. Thank you.
And we will follow
Thank you,
up.
thank you, appreciate that. Thank you for
Thank you
attention.
very much, too. And our great friend Glenn Bailey.
Thank you, Chairman
A
Rosen,
great friend because you've been super on the whole bike issue throughout the cities.
and so have you, Councilmember Rosendahl. And I did want to take a few of my seconds to acknowledge and thank you for your leadership of this committee and for your leadership on transportation and specifically on the bicycle issues over the last several years. Appreciate that. I am here actually on one of those issues, and I'm switching hats now to as president of the Encino Neighborhood Council. I am here regarding a specific issue. It has to do with White Oak Avenue, portion that is in Council District 5, Mr. Koretz's district, which is on the bicycle plan as a backbone network, part of the backbone network. Bike lanes have been installed, thanks to the Department of Transportation, between Victory and Roscoe Boulevard during the past year or so. The stretch south of Oxnard Street, where it connects with the Orange Line and the existing bike lanes, I sent an email last year, over a year ago, saying, could we look at that down to Ventura Boulevard? I was told it'd be looked at during this fiscal year, which, as you know, is rapidly coming to a close. I specifically, and there have been many other projects that have been put in that have not been part of the backbone, which is great, but it seems to me there should be some prioritization of backbone. This particular stretch of White Oak has two sections that have just been slurry sealed, resurfaced, and it seems to me, and this includes Oxnard to Burbank, or actually Martha, about a half of a mile, and then south of the 101 Ventura Freeway for about a quarter of a mile have been slurry sealed. It seems like this is an opportune time to get those bike lanes put in before the striping is put in, and then have to be redone and waste money. So I'm not sure exactly why at least part of this can't be done now, but since I've had communication with various parties, DOT, the mayor's office, et cetera, I'm just bringing this to your attention, and I know since the general manager of the department is here, perhaps, I'll make that request again. So Ventura Boulevard to Oxnard Street, White Oak Avenue, it's approximately 2 miles, backbone network in Council District 5. And it's incidentally, the Encino Neighborhood Council voted over a year ago to support the installation of the bicycle lanes. So that does have the support of the Neighborhood Council. Thank you.
Very good. So Mr. Koretz's ears are all perked up on it, and of course, Mr. DeGavito as well. So Jaime, I'm expecting you to follow up with that and make sure we do it. As we know, he's been one of our major leaders in the bicycle issues, and we're very thrilled, frankly, with his leadership, and I look forward to you working that out.
Mr. Chair, do you know Mr. Gallagher there, Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Gallagher is a very effective engineer. Work with the local engineer as a suggestion. Thank you.
And he's a great guy, that guy. Okay, so we've done that. Now we're going to be the joint meeting, okay, of this great committee, the budget, and the transportation to do it. And at this point, nobody's given me a little briefing, but let's ask the staff to come on up.
Let me announce the item. It's item number 1 on the agenda, which is a CAO report relative to the proposed agreement between LADOT and Xerox State and Local Solutions for the operation of parking citation processing and collection services.
Right. Okay, so let's hear it.
I think more than
And pardon me, folks, while I start eating a little bit. I don't mean to be eating, but body.
Probably true.
Good afternoon, Ida Rubio with the Office of the City Administrative Officer. This item was last heard on May 22nd at the Transportation Committee meeting, and the item was referred to this joint committee meeting. At the last meeting, just to briefly recap, our office provided a brief summary of the CAO report, and DOT provided a PowerPoint presentation on key highlights of the procurement and evaluation process and the reason why Xerox is being recommended. In addition, both proposers were given an opportunity to provide public comment, and there was a robust dialogue between city staff and the committee. I'd like to present the same summary and our recommendation since we have some new council members present, if you're okay with that. As you know, the Department of Transportation has been involved in a lengthy procurement process since 2012 for the selection of a vendor to provide parking citation processing and collection services citywide. These services include operation of 4 customer service payment centers, correspondence processing, operational support for adjudication functions, parking permit processing, and all collection activities and reporting. As part of the RFP process, 2 vendors submitted proposals, Xerox State and Local Solutions and Duncan Solutions. Both proposers submitted higher cost proposals than the current contract, and both were asked to submit last, best, and final offers. Xerox was ultimately recommended by the evaluation committee as a vendor who could provide the best value to the city for these services. The CAO report before you is in direct response to the Department of Transportation's request submitted to the mayor's office seeking authority to enter into a 5-year contract with Xerox State and Local Solutions for the operation of the city's parking citation processing and collection services as a bundled service. In addition, a request was made seeking additional policy direction to further negotiate key contract terms. The CAO report provides a brief summary of our review and outlines the proposed cost for this new contract at $52.7 million over 5 years for a bundled service. This cost is $7.2 million above the current contract price. We concur with DOT's selection of Xerox and recommend that authority be provided to the Department of Transportation to enter into a 5-year contract with an optional 1-year extension with Xerox. We also ask that DOT be instructed to seek additional price concessions to maintain current pricing levels without a reduction in the scope of work, and to negotiate a minimum net collection rate relative to performance. If you have any questions, I'm available to respond as our representatives from the Department of Transportation.
Yeah, please, Tommy.
So, Madam CAO.
Yes.
Reviewing this, what you feel your recommendation is to give it to one entity that would be in the best interest of the city of Los Angeles.
Correct. There were 2 proposers, Xerox and Duncan, and we concur with DOT's report that Xerox be given the contract.
Clearly, and the CAO, Mr. Santana, reviewed this at the highest level of the CAO's office.
He reviews every single report that comes out of our office, and he is in agreement with that.
Absolutely, strongly. All right, members, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
I had a lot of questions the last time. I probably have more this time. I still find this process a little bit confusing and a lot of conflicting issues. One is the recommendation asks for permission to negotiate a different price point benefit from Xerox. And it seems to me that, you can tell me otherwise, hopefully otherwise, that we'll get a better price and we'll get a reduced scope of work from what we required in the RFP. So how do we address complaints? How do we address customer service levels that we want to enhance if we're talking about actually trying to reduce the cost and cutting back on services? So are we doing that, or are we just trying to
I don't
negotiate a
think
better
based on the advice that we've been given by the city attorney's office, the department can go back and negotiate a lower price because this vendor has been selected as the winning vendor. Any price concessions that are negotiated, Xerox would have to basically eat the cost of that. There cannot be a reduced scope of service.
That is correct, Councilmember Koretz. That's the correct recitation of the law.
Okay, so we won't be looking at a lower standard of service than what was in the RFP.
No.
Okay, also, a number of folks have questioned throughout this process whether Duncan can actually do the work and whether they might or might not be insolvent. Yet at the same time, we put them on a list of companies that at some point could be doing collections for the city, which I presume they wouldn't be if they were unable to do it. So which is it? Do we think they are able to do this work? Do we think they're unable to do this work? Do we
That's a
think they're
good
solvent or
question,
not?
yeah.
What's our take on it?
Councilman Jaime De La Vega with DOT. I think the issue of risk as it relates to the ability of Duncan to perform is reflected in the scores that the evaluation panel provided. That was one of the reasons that Xerox was rated higher in corporate capability compared to Duncan. Also, this contract's a little different than the Department of Finance bench in that to the extent that there are risks with Duncan, they are only one of 7 firms on the Department of Finance bench, meaning even if they did have a performance issue, the city would still have service from the other 6 companies on the finance bench. This is different in that this contract, both the processing collections, represents approximately $155 million a year in general fund revenue that the mayor and council depend on to fund core services. So in the department's recommendation, we did factor in those risks, and that's one of the reasons that we're recommending Xerox.
But people lobbying on the other side, people on staff have given me various levels of concern about their solvency. Where are they exactly on the solvency continuum? What do we think of their abilities? I know I've seen a document that said they had a, if I recall correctly, $6 million line of credit with Bank of America. I don't know how that factors in. What do we know specifically? How certain are we that they aren't solvent, or how close to insolvency are they, or are they in reasonable shape? Where exactly are they?
The Robert Andalon, Department of Transportation, as part of the review process, each of the companies was required to submit a financial statements, audited financial statements. In the financial statements, we discovered that they have a bit of a downward trend as far as the number of contracts, as well as the cash on hand and the overall equity within the company for the shareholders. There's been two consecutive years where they've had a drop below the actual, they're in a negative position as far as that is concerned. So the concern that the department has is that the financial solvency may be not present to be able to provide the work that's necessary in order to ensure the collection of the $155 million in general fund.
Well, what you told me wasn't that clear. You told me they've reduced some of their contracts and they haven't made money the last 2 years.
Correct.
That doesn't necessarily make them insolvent. There are probably, I don't know how many large companies that might be in that situation and still have plenty of money and still be perfectly solvent.
Yeah, Councilman, we're not commenting on whether or not we believe Duncan is solvent or insolvent. We're advising you based on the financial data they submitted to us and our review of that data that we're concerned that there's performance risk if the council were to award part of the work to Duncan. It's a risk. We can't predict the future, but there is a risk.
But there's nothing to base an assumption that they are insolvent that we're aware of.
No, we do not have any information that they are insolvent.
Okay. Also, about the most favored public entity clause, is Xerox not currently supposed to be issuing quarterly reports?
They are supposed to be issuing quarterly reports in relation to analysis of their current contract versus other contracts within the state of California. Since the last meeting, the staff collected contracts for 6 different cities within the state of California, and some of the contracts do have similar services. but the quantities and the service and the overall services are substantially different for the city of Los Angeles. So therefore, the price is different.
What about just the actual document? Aren't they supposed to be giving us quarterly reports?
They're supposed to be providing a quarterly report, correct?
Have they been giving quarterly reports? to
No,
the
they have
city?
not.
What's the reason for that? And any reason why we'd assume that they would start following the rules once they have a renewed contract?
I don't have a specific reason why they did not deliver those particular reports.
Any reason why we let them get away with it?
I don't think that we let them get away with it. I think that there was a lot of other issues that the department and the staff was actually working on. You can see from the work that we've done as far as the increase in collections that we focused our efforts on where we actually can make a difference.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that this would be a higher priority than that. It just seems like, at least in passing, we should be able to get them to follow part of their contract, and if they don't, it's certainly not a positive reflection on them for not doing something that they're contracted to do. What are we paying compared to other cities on a contracted basis? I understand that there are some other cities and counties that would appear to be getting a better deal than we are.
Well, they're being charged a different price because the level of services and the quantity of the services that they're providing are different. So it's difficult to say that we should be getting exactly what the city of Oakland or the city of Santa Monica is getting when the city of Santa Monica may issue 54,000 sites a year.
So have we looked at it and analyzed the different services to see whether we actually think we're getting as good a deal as these other cities? And
we've done
comparing apples to apples, obviously they're not exactly the same contracts.
We have reviewed it. We don't see that there's sufficient information there for us to go back to them and say that we're not getting a fair price.
So do we know one way or the other?
One way or another, whether...
You said there's not enough information to say that we're not getting a fair price.
Well, again,
Is there enough
quantities,
information to feel-
actually, we have enough information based on the quantities of service, what they're doing for others. It's just, it's a huge difference as far as the level of service, as far as the quantity of services that are being provided to other cities. What we expect in Los Angeles is substantially different. We expect a higher level of service. We have many more transactions that actually are occurring. So there is a greater demand within the city of Los Angeles.
And do we know if having collectors and offices based out of the region is a significant factor? I know Duncan has asserted that they'll open shop here and get local people to do the work. Have we found that this matters in past contracts? I assume it does to some degree, and that's part of why we picked 7 local people to do the collections in the future.
I'm not sure I understand your question, sir.
What does it matter that they're based out of the area, and that there isn't apparently any plan to have local offices, but instead just a contract with other vendors to do the collections? Do we know if that makes a difference? Do we think it makes a difference?
I think that if you have a local presence, it does make a difference as far as being aware of the economic situation in the area, as well as having a direct access to the contract managers on a day-to-day basis. So that if you have a situation, you can actually drive down to their office and have a face-to-face meeting about a situation.
So you think that's a positive?
I think the closer you are to the people that you supervise, it's better.
Yeah, I can just add to that, Councilman. I think it's positive, but it's not a determining factor in service levels. For example, Xerox in their current contract has increased their collections rate every year for the past few years without having the local presence. So I agree it is preferable, but it wouldn't be a determining factor in the staff's recommendation to the council.
How about looking at bifurcating the contract? Would we lose access to new technologies that Xerox offers if we bifurcated that contract?
The way the current contract is written, or the way the current RFP is written, there's a certain level of technology that would be provided as part of the processing. As we stated in the last meeting, there is a $5 million a year annual difference if Xerox were to be selected as a processing, and the council would elect to bifurcate the contract.
Okay, and I have a couple of questions for the Duncan and Xerox representatives, so I don't know if I should just hold that until they come up to speak at some point.
Yeah, why don't you just hold it?
Okay, so those are all my questions for staff.
Right. Now, we have 7 or 8 people for, 7 or 8 people against. Now,
Mr. Parks has his hand up.
oh,
Let me just ask one question.
please.
To the city attorney, I don't know if this is your document or it came from your office. I'd just like to know on the last paragraph on
Wait,
page
Mr.
8.
Parks, if I may, if that's a report from the city attorney's office, I would suggest that you not quote from it, as it is confidential city attorney-client
Can I just
privilege
point at it then?
document.
And I just
Maybe we
wanted
should hear from the
to-
city attorney about what's
I just want to
appropriate
ask him
to...
what the paragraph means. The last
Mr. Nagel.
maybe the
I don't
city
think
attorney
that
might be
last
able to-
paragraph, I'm not going to quote from the last paragraph, but I think I can address that because I think it's been a matter that has actually been on the public record.
Let me just ask one question about it. You've laid out a process. Am I to understand that that process can only be done in council, or could it be done at the committee level?
Full council.
Full council. Thank you.
Okay. Now, we have 4 and against. I know those that represent Duncan would like an opportunity to respond and respond back. But we will have a real healthy discussion. But I'm asking right now if they would do this for all these folks that are with the Solutions Group to come on up, because I want you to have the first shot. That is Tim McCosker, Willis, Duncan Solutions, Mike Nicholson, looks like President and CEO, Jason Johnson, and Matt Anastillo, and Alex Flavors.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may, before they speak,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you for inviting Budget and Finance to participate in this process. We appreciate it. I'm trying, and especially in light of Mr. Parks' question, which is an issue that I wrestled with a bit too, that what's on the agenda today is a report from the CAO. The CAO has a variety of recommendations, all of which involve approval of this contract. So I just want to make sure that we're all clearer than I am as I sit here about the scope of today's discussion. And if we are having members of 2 competing bidders coming up to talk about us, what they're here to talk about to us is the bid that has already been submitted to the city. They are not here to negotiate. They are not here to offer anything additional that wasn't previously provided. I'd like to admonish the speakers, first of all, to that effect. But I'd like to also make sure that we're clear, and unless I'm not understanding the process, we're here to evaluate what has already been completed by the staff, not to
Exactly right.
reinitiate this process.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
Chairman, if it's okay,
Please, go ahead.
We're here to listen, but we can make a recommendation that's broader than the CAO's report.
Well, the CAO, you can make the recommendation as advised in the, in my...
This committee.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But it would go forward to full council for them to make the ultimate decision.
Very good. Thank
Okay.
you. Thank
Great.
you.
Mr. Chairman, if it's okay, the rest of my colleagues would it be possible if they gave me my time, their time, and maybe we had 10 minutes to discuss?
You're talking about your folks?
Correct.
You stand them all up, let them say something, whatever you want to do is fine.
Yeah, they'll cede their time to me if that's okay.
I think what he's asking is, before we start the clock, how much time would you like to give the Duncan folks, and Mike and I would split that time?
How much time do you want?
Could we get 10?
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
you got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure. And that means these other cards are not going to be pulled.
That's correct.
Note them for the file.
Yeah, we're going to note them for the file. There's Tina. We mentioned her name. We mentioned all these names.
Yes, sir, you did.
Okay, great. Go for it.
Thank you. Good
5
afternoon.
minutes, clock starting.
10, right?
10.
10.
5 and 5.
5 and 5, that's right.
Or 10, I don't.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Nicholas. I'm the president and CEO of Duncan Solutions. It's a pleasure to be here again. Duncan's been a partner with the city for over 40 years, and we process and collect tickets for 200 cities, including 92 in California. In city after city where we have assumed collections responsibility from incumbent vendors, including Xerox, we've consistently increased revenues to the point where we're recognized now as the premier ticket collections vendor in the country. The department's evaluation agreed that Duncan was superior in collections to Xerox and that our California collection rate exceeds the city's current collection rate. Further, our proposal guaranteed that our increased revenues would more than cover the costs of splitting the contract. The RFP, the department's recommendation, and the CAO report all confirm that the decision on whether or not to split the contract is a policy one for the council to make. Therefore, the question today is whether the committees want to secure the benefits, risk-free, of splitting the program or to maintain the status quo with the same 28-year vendor, the same underperforming collections program, and the same conflict of interest that's at the heart of the billion-dollar lawsuit against the city and Xerox, alleging that Xerox has a direct financial incentive to deny appeals so that they can earn a collections fee later on in the process. The council has the opportunity to restore fairness and accountability to this program by splitting it like New York City, Chicago, Houston, Long Beach, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. have all done. This will improve the city's program in 3 key areas: enhanced collections, customer service, and operational efficiency. Enhanced collections. The city has increased...
Please. It's counting down, but it's flashing 1 minute.
It's a technical problem. His
Yeah.
clock here is correct. Hold the clock right
As long as it's all right. Yes, it stopped.
there. Note the time, Mr. Clerk.
It's been before and stopped.
Okay. The city has increased parking fines and added new penalties in 6 of the last 8 years. It's caused a bit of a backlash with motorists, and it's masked the fact that along with other changes to the pre-collections phase that have increased the incentive for motorists to pay, that the collections efforts have actually underperformed during that time, as repeatedly noted in city audit reports. The solution to the problem is to do a better job of collecting what the city's owed, and Duncan's identified $50 to $75 million in increased revenues it'll generate during the 5-year contract term, and we're guaranteeing the city that we will collect at least $30 million of that amount. In contrast, as you heard, Xerox is proposing to subcontract collections to 2 out-of-state firms. Customer service. Duncan's increased revenues, backed by a guarantee, will cover the higher costs of Xerox's processing proposal compared to the current contract costs. Therefore, LADOT can get all of the customer service and technology enhancements that were promised by Xerox without having to negotiate a reduced scope of work. These enhancements will improve the level of service delivered to constituents. Further, by eliminating the conflict of interest in handling appeals, motorists will be assured of receiving a fair hearing when they dispute a ticket. Third, operational efficiency. In April, the council unanimously approved 7 secondary collections contracts, including one with Duncan, that will require Xerox and LADOT to assign parking tickets over after 15 months. Splitting the contract today simply lets the Superior Collections Company work the debt a year sooner. The so-called risks of splitting the program and interfacing with a third-party collections company are going to have to be addressed anyway by the department, since the direction from the council to hire the 7 secondary collection firms. The operational rules and technical interfaces needed between Xerox system and Duncan's system have already been in place for 6 years in Washington, D.C. under the exact same environment, where revenues have doubled in terms of yield of what's been assigned for collections. To ensure operational coordination, Duncan will open a collections office to serve within the city, not just this contract, but also all of our West Coast collections clients. We'll hire city residents and local women and minority-owned subcontractors, some of whom are with us here today and submitted cards. just want to address the issue about financial stability that was raised. While the Los Angeles collections contract is large, it wouldn't be Duncan's largest contract, and it represents less than 10% of our annual revenues. Duncan, contrary to what you heard, is a profitable company. We're enjoying double-digit, this year, 14% revenue growth. Our audited financials from last year show we had net income in excess of $5 million and operating cash flow, net operating cash flow in excess of $10 million. Between our cash on hand and our existing credit lines, we have over $10 million in immediate liquidity, and supportive shareholders have raised funds for us in the past up to $30 million for growth opportunities. The board has passed a resolution authorizing the issuance of a revenue guarantee.
Excuse me.
Thank you. And I have a copy of a letter from Bank of America that's...
Excuse me, I have to interject here. Under the law, they cannot, neither proposer can introduce new information that was not contained in their best and final offer or their proposal.
I'm responding to Councilman...
You're not allowed
who
to
asked.
enhance your proposal through testimony under the law.
That's the law.
Can I ask a point of information on that? People have been asserting that they're in poor financial shape, including lobbyists for the other side. So I think there needs to be some ability to answer that question if indeed they're not in the kind of poor financial shape that has been asserted.
I believe the department has raised the issue, but they've raised the issue based on information that was submitted in both the proposals and the best and final offers, the financial information that both companies submitted. That is what the department considered, what the evaluation panel considered. You cannot now, after the panel has already evaluated the proposals and the recommendation has been made, hear further information to enhance either proposal, either by Xerox or Duncan at this point.
So even clarifying that would be considered a bid enhancement?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
So I'll point out in page 2 of the recommendation itself, and this was a quote, LADOT believes that both firms, Xerox and Duncan Solutions, are qualified and could effectively deliver citation processing and collection services. So I think that speaks to the evaluation that was done contemporaneous with the submission, not necessarily what was heard here. And our surety company has increased bonding capacity to $20 million based on our growth just in the last year. So in conclusion, by splitting this contract, as comparable cities have done, the council will increase city revenues, eliminate the conflict of interest, allow Xerox to focus on improving its front-end service, and promote economic development, all under the risk-free umbrella of the revenue guarantee that we offered. Thank you. Thank you. Our council...
Can you hold the time for just 1 second, because the clock has not moved? How much time is left, so I know how to...
3:56.
I'm sorry?
3:56.
Well, not on this side, it hasn't moved, that's all. It just says 1 minute, and it has not moved the entire time.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry.
3:56.
3:56, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
4 minutes.
Appreciate it very much. I just want to make sure I don't waste your time.
4 minutes.
Tim McCosker for Mayor Brown. Thanks very much. First of all, some of you, at the T committee last time, and some of you were not present, we believe Councilman Parks asked the right question at the last hearing. It may have been alleged that no one in the room understood what his question was, but I think a lot of folks did, and listening to the tape, I did, and I think Council for Xerox understood it. They understood the question. They just didn't like the answer. And that question, of course, was whether the council, this committee, can make a recommendation that the council direct DOT to split the contract and go negotiate a lower price with Xerox for processing and a financial guarantee with Duncan for collections. Can that be the recommendation? And of course the answer is yes. Of course it's yes. But no one ever bothered to answer Mr. Parks' question. Instead, there was some convoluted responses and confusion labeling the guarantee an enhancement and asserting that the city can only negotiate terms with the winning vendor. In fact, somebody even said that there was a winning vendor already, which of course is not true. The problem with these arguments is that they're false, they're misleading, because the process isn't complete. We are right now in the middle of the process. You are the process. The only thing before you today is a recommendation that you might make to council to authorize a negotiation. No vendor has been selected. The CAO even today misstated that. No vendor has been selected. You do that. DOT doesn't do that. So the answer to Councilman Parks' question is actually very simple. Today, DOT is asking you for authority, and listen to this, it's very important. They are asking you for authority to negotiate, to give council the authority to negotiate both a price and a financial guarantee. with Xerox. It's number 4 in November 20th report from last year. They're asking actually for you to be able to negotiate a financial guarantee, unfortunately with Xerox. So with the wrong company, but to say that you taking an action to split this and negotiate a financial guarantee with Duncan is not only false, but it's incongruous with what they're recommending you do, and when I'm not asking you to do it, to do with Xerox. So let's be clear, you have the power to reject the staff recommendation. Of course you know that. And you can choose another path. You can split the contract. In fact, as you know, the RFP was explicitly designed to allow you to split the contract. And Mike has gone through all of the substantive reasons why you should do so. But just on the legal side, you have the ability to insulate yourself from added costs when you split the contract, if there are added costs, and we have no reason to doubt that there may be. But Duncan has already told the city, and this is in the materials, Duncan has already told the city that it will provide a guarantee. It did so in the BAFO that you all asked for, that DOT asked for. DOT was clearly intrigued by that idea because the first thing they did was ask Xerox if they would give a financial guarantee, and Xerox can answer that question for themselves today, I suppose. And now staff is telling you in the staff reports, not in the RFP packages, but in the staff reports that they are going to demand a financial guarantee from whoever wins. So to say it is a bid enhancement is a red herring. Sure, you can't enhance when you're in the middle of the process, but you all can split the contract. You all can split the contract, and you can direct price be negotiated for the reasons stated in the report, and you can direct that a financial guarantee be provided. Not only is it the right thing to do, but actually DOT suggests that you do it, whether it's with Duncan or with Xerox. I will say, in conclusion, just because staff has played the game of hide the ball, you don't have to do that. When Duncan and Xerox were asked for a BAFO, Duncan responded back, and they responded back with something that did not include an instrument. It said, we'll provide a financial guarantee. Did staff pick up the phone? Yes and no. They didn't pick up the phone and call Duncan, they picked up the phone and called Xerox. Just because staff is hiding the ball and punishing Duncan, and by the way, who cares whether they punish Duncan? They're entitled to do that, but don't let them punish the city's general fund. With that, I'd say our recommendation is that the law, the facts before you, and most importantly, good public policy all dictate that you reject the staff recommendation, ask the full council to instruct DOT to negotiate a split of the contract with the price concessions and the guarantees with which the CAO and DOT have already asked for. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Do you want to make any comment on what they were just saying, City Attorney?
I believe staff can probably answer some of the questions that were raised regarding whether staff contacted Xerox, whether...
Would you like to do that now with staff or let the others
I would,
present and then do it?
Unless you have specific questions of the staff, I would recommend that you go forward with and let the next party speak.
The next group speak, then afterwards you'll discuss with us where we're at and what we operate under.
That's correct.
Mr. Chair, do you want to add to that strategy?
I have questions for the city attorney and others, but I think just in the interest of protocol and equanimity, we should probably hear from both sides, and then we'll come back and ask those questions.
Very good. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for that as well. Now, let's ask Xerox. You got 10 minutes. Figure it out and determine who's going to come up here and speak. Okay, so who's the lead on this? Okay, we got 4 people sitting down and we have 5 cards. Some more. Now, do you want all these people to speak? No, but they're here to support Xerox. Okay, those who are in favor of Xerox, stand up so we can see the support that has just been discussed. Okay, and then you can sit down now, and those that are here for the other group, getting a little confused in my mind, stand up. Okay, great. All right, thank you all very much for that.
Thank you. Gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Ann Minster-Nwede. I'm the Vice President of Xerox Transportation Solutions. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Xerox is a transportation solutions leader in the United States and here in California. We're especially strong and have worked in partnership with the City of Los Angeles to achieve transportation goals of mobility, congestion management, and revenue generation. This procurement process has been an extremely thorough and detailed process, starting in 2011 with the issuance of an RFP, which the industry commented on. We have been recommended for this award no less than 4 times. We were voted unanimous through the RFP process, unanimous vote in the protest process, a best and final offer lower than our competitor, and now recommended by the Chief Administrative Officer. We were recommended for good reasons. Our innovative technology, our track record of service both in Los Angeles and our customers all over the country. Ask Boston, ask Philadelphia, ask San Francisco, ask LA County, Denver, and many others. Xerox corporate financial stability. Our proven ability to serve the city, a very large city like the City of Los Angeles. And most important, our superior collection rate. Off the latest report, 83 paid, 87% closure rate. This is a performance-based contract. If we don't collect the tickets, we don't get paid, no matter how much money we spend on collection calls, collection notices, marking credit, integrating with the DMV and the Franchise Tax Board. What this contract is about is risk. Is the city willing to risk a $154 million revenue stream on splitting the contract? Is the city willing to spend an additional $20 million to have one company, Xerox, process your citations and hope that that other company, Duncan, can make up the difference with enhanced collections? The CIO report states this well in the report. In fact, quote, unbundling the services increases the 5-year cost of processing alone by $20 million. Based on the proposals, and I'm still quoting, there is no financial advantage to unbundling the services and issuing separate contracts. Is the city willing to take the risk that Duncan will do as well as Xerox in collections? Oakland, Berkeley, and others have recently evaluated both companies and also awarded citation processing and collections to Xerox. You have heard a lot about collection rates. We can give you data about our performance throughout the country, as can Duncan. However, we do not have to speculate about our collection rate in Los Angeles. You have one of the best collection rates in the country. I understand you've been subject to intense lobbying from both companies. It's complicated. It's too much to digest. But actually, we think the choice is simple. Your staff, the Department of Transportation, and the CAO staff, has been very thorough, analyzed the numbers, assessed the risk, looked at track records, validated collection rates, and taken great pains to be objective. Xerox has been chosen again and again during this process. It's a clear choice. There's no doubt. It's been completely unanimous. We urge you to approve the recommendations of these city agencies, approve this recommendation of the award to Xerox, and continue the exciting transportation innovation in this new contract period. Thank you.
How much time is there?
Over to
6:20.
6:20.
6 minutes.
6 minutes.
Whoever wants to go second.
Hi, my name is Vincent Valdez, and I'm Vice President of Operations for Xerox, and have personally worked on our contract with the city for over 20 years. Very proud of our accomplishments. They are well captured in our proposal and in LADOT's report. I won't go into those here, other than to say I'm very proud to have been serving the city in multiple capacities for over 20 years.
Over what years?
Over 20 years. Duncan is asking, in effect, asking this council committee to do a very risky thing. They're asking you to disturb a $155 million revenue stream to the city. Parking ticket processing and collections by their nature are very tightly integrated. And when you break them apart, okay, you start introducing new complexities to processing, to project management, to collections that weren't there before. Okay, so the question becomes, why would the city do this? Why? Duncan would have you believe that they will collect more, okay, than we do on the collections component of our contract. And that may be true, it may not be true, okay, but by definition, it is a risk. It is a risk that LADOT is recommending against. The RFP has within it a provision already that says if we do not collect on parking tickets by 450 days, the city has the option to recall that citation, okay, and give it to the Office of Finance, and they will pursue it. That is an opportunity for Duncan to participate. That is less risky, and it is less risky. Okay, I'll keep you short. So please, we urge you, do not accept that risk. Follow LADOT's thoughtful recommendation. Thank you.
How much time do we have left?
3:40.
3:40. David, why don't you Hi, take my name is David Cummins. Good afternoon. I'm the Managing Director of Xerox's Parking and Justice Solutions business units. Just wanted to address three of Councilman Koretz's questions. The first is that about a local office presence. In fact, Xerox is a U.S. company. We've been around for over 100 years, and we have hundreds of employees in L.A. So we have a strong local presence. This is a city we've been in for 30 years, and we're very proud of our relationship with the city. It's important to point out that Duncan is an Australian company, not a U.S. company. Second question was regards to the submission of the MFE quarterly reports. I apologize that we neglected to send those last few reports, and I've asked staff to remedy that immediately. That was an oversight. It was not intentional. I apologize for that. But clearly, LA is getting our very best pricing, and that will be demonstrated in the documents we provide. Third question regards to Duncan's insolvency, and I can understand why that's a question, and they've had a history of unprofitability. I think that also an equally important question is that this contract would represent their largest contract by 3 times. Their largest contract with ticket processing is the city of Milwaukee. LA is 3 times the volume of that. And so there is not just the financial risk inherent with going with Duncan, but also the operational risk. Can they, as a small company, pull off a contract of this size with this much money on the line? With that, I'll turn it over to George Mitchell.
George Kiefer, Manat Phelps.
2-minute warning.
2-minute warning, all right. I think most things have been covered. In most cases, this would be a fairly simple matter. Not a single person throughout the evaluation process, not a single person on the protest committee, not anybody on the staff, not the general manager, not the CAO. Not a single person has suggested splitting the contract or giving any portion of it to Duncan. So it would be normal and easy except for the amount of advocacy we've had in the contract. So I would urge you not to get confused. Councilman Koretz, I know it can be confusing. That's what Duncan has tried to do on this. Their supposed guarantee in the contract was conditioned on you raising ticket prices by $11 and increasing your ticket writing from 2.6 million tickets to 3.3. You were going to have to guarantee you did that in order for their guarantee to be good. It's a phony guarantee. This issue that council raised for Duncan about, well, they're going to be negotiating a guarantee afterwards, he doesn't tell you it's a different kind of guarantee. And you can negotiate that afterwards with the recommended awardee. In fact, your administrative code doesn't permit you to do anything else. The recommended awardee is the only one you can negotiate with respect to price. But the guarantee they're looking for is a collections percentage guarantee, which is possible to get. But you can't guarantee revenue because it's dependent on how many tickets you write. That's why they condition their guarantee on the number of tickets you would write. So there's a saying in the law, you pound the law if you have the law, you pound the facts if you have the facts, and you pound the table if you have neither, which is really what Duncan is doing. I recommend you move ahead with the staff recommendation. The city's processes are under question every day as to whether we're bothered by politics or we're following our own processes. This has been an open, fair process that lasted 18 months. I urge you to support it
support your CAO, and support your general manager and the rest of the people who have taken time to review this process. Thank you.
Boy, he did it just in the time. Guy's an expert at that stuff. Okay, there were a couple of more cards, but we're assuming they're all part of the package.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so we've heard from both presenters here, and we have questions among ourselves, and obviously we have questions for the two of them. City Attorney, what is your suggested strategy at this point? Have staff come up, interact?
Yes, staff can come up, and if you have questions of staff, you're certainly permitted to ask those questions.
My colleagues can ask them as well?
Yes.
Okay, come on up, staff. Put it all out there, and Mr. Krikorian grabbed the mic first, so he's going to go first.
Well, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And before you put it all out there, let me ask a more pointed question of the city attorney. Is there any limitation on what this committee may or may not inquire of as to staff that will, so that we don't risk running afoul of restrictions on the content of the bids?
Well, what you don't want to do is you don't want to ask them if they've received any further information that was not submitted in either the proposals by both companies or in their best and final offers, because under Los Angeles Administrative Code Section 10.15 F10, once the BAFOs were submitted to the general manager, that was the end. The city cannot, and the companies cannot provide additional information without the request of the general manager, and that did not happen in this case.
So while the CAO's recommendations include recommendations to negotiate with whomever the winning bidder is with regard to certain terms, one of the recommendations that the CAO made as a subject matter of that negotiation would be providing financial guarantees. So
Yes.
how do you address the fact that they might be able to discuss that in negotiations, and how does that compare to it being a bid enhancement?
Discussing a financial guarantee regarding the collection rate would be appropriate because both parties claimed that they would enhance, in Duncan's case, they said that they would do it, enhance revenue. In Xerox's case, they said they would improve their collection rate, and they cited specific numbers. I believe it was 85% the first year, 87% in the second, and beyond that. Because they said that they would do that in their RFP, both parties, if they were selected, the department could go back and negotiate what that form of guarantee in terms of what they said in their proposal or BAFO would look like, whether they were penalties if you didn't match that percentage you said you would provide.
So just, and again, I'm sorry if I'm the only one that's not fully understanding this, but it would be appropriate then to negotiate with a winning bidder
Yes.
about what financial guarantees would be appropriate
Right.
and enhance the contract with financial guarantees. But it would not be appropriate for this committee or for the council to consider additional information about financial
Right.
guarantees in deciding who the winning bidder should be.
Right, or to discuss specifics in terms of what those negotiations might look like, because it weakens our position, the city's position, when you go to negotiate. That's the reason, under case law, that's normally not done. You can always go back after the winning bidder has been selected. In this particular instance, the department is asking for authorization to enter into those negotiations.
Right. So now Mr. McOsker indicated that it would always be within the province of the council to split a contract. If we were to make the policy decision to do that, would that require the city to start over with the RFP process, given the fact that the bidders submitted bids based on an entire package?
No, it wouldn't. You wouldn't have to start over because the RFP was put out with the understanding that the city might actually split, and they asked for 4 options from both proposers. So if you decided you wanted to split the contract, you could authorize the department to enter into contract negotiations with each of the parties.
Okay. Okay, very good, thank you. So with that, let's stick with the subject of splitting the contract and the costs related to that, because there have been a number of numbers that have been tossed around, and I want to try to clarify that. There is some administrative cost. The department determined that there would be some administrative cost in splitting the contract because you would need to transfer the authority over collections to a non-incumbent. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
How did you quantify that?
Robert.
There's two costs. There's the initial cost is the $5 million cost annually. That would be as a result of splitting awarding the processing contract to Xerox and awarding the collections contract to Duncan. The administrative cost would be basically determining exactly how we would transfer the citations to Duncan, and then the collections then would be paid from there. The information would come back to Xerox so that we would have one database of record, and we would be able to reconcile all of the monies that we pay to the state, the county, and the court for all of the paid citations as part of the state law.
Okay, so how much would that?
That we have not, basically, we've contacted a number of cities to determine exactly what they involve in doing that. And we have some information. Some cities do it all internally. Some cities use a secondary collection agency, and some cities use either Duncan or Xerox. So it's not clear exactly what those costs are, but the known costs are $5 million more per year.
Okay, Mr. Englander, you had something you wanted to clarify on that?
Yeah, point of clarification on that, because it says here, I'm just reading the CAO report on page 5, where it says the options of bundled versus unbundled costs as it relates to Mr. Krikorian's questions. And it's cited here at $25.5 million for unbundled if we split it.
Yeah,
Is that assuming that that's all 5 years?
I'm getting to that point, I think. So it's, one is the administrative cost that the city will entail in doing the transfer. The other is the increased price that the vendor would charge if this were a split contract, right?
That's
because
correct.
On the assumption that the processing part is in part subsidized by the revenues that the vendor would derive from the collection. Is that right? Bless you.
That's correct.
Okay, so that amount is an additional amount to the at least $5 million in admin costs? Am I understanding that right?
The $5 million is the cost associated with having a second company involved. So in other words, Xerox bid goes up by $5 million per year to allow the city the flexibility to bifurcate the contract.
So over the course of the contract term, that comes to the number Mr. Englander just cited. Okay. All right. Now, in addition to those hard costs, there is presumably some degree of increased performance risk in that we would be transferring the collections component to somebody that we don't have a track record with. And I think you alluded to that earlier. But, I mean, there's no real way to quantify that, I suppose, except to recognize that there is some risk element.
There is risk associated with that. Again, it would be, it's difficult to say why, what the amount of risk would be. When we looked at other cities within California, specifically Oakland and Berkeley, as to why they had Duncan, yet they chose to leave to go to a different company. Their concern was about the level, the customer service level, as well as just the overall current technology that they did not have.
Okay. So it's over $150 million in collected revenues. Presumably, if there was even a small variation in that, a small reduction in that, that would constitute a substantial decline in revenues. A 2% drop would be $3 million loss
correct.
in revenues. Okay. Okay, now there was a good deal of discussion of solvency of Duncan and so forth, and the fact that they are included in the list of collection firms for secondary collection. I think that the documents are very clear that Duncan is capable of doing this. Your analysis suggested that both vendors could provide all of the services requested, the bids are responsive, and they appear to be qualified to do everything that they would be asked to do.
That is correct. And to add to that, Councilman, what we're recommending and what we've found based on the procurement process is Xerox is a superior company as it relates to this proposal. It's a lower cost and there's lower risk to the city's finances and the operations of our processing and collections.
Right. Now, the secondary collection aspect is a much, much smaller body of work, given the fact that, first of all, it's secondary collections, not primary collections, so you have fewer accounts, and that we have multiple vendors who we're contracting with to provide that secondary collection. So that narrows the pool even further. So the capacity issue when it comes to secondary collection is small potatoes compared to the capacity that would be required for primary collection of all parking violations.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, there was discussion by, well, at least by Duncan, I think, about the Washington, D.C. performance example, and as it was presented, there was an increase in performance in Washington when Duncan took over that contract from Xerox. Was that something that staff considered during the bid process?
If I can start, Councilman, then Robert will continue. We did consider that. I think that that part of the public comment was interesting in that Duncan criticized Xerox for achieving better collections in L.A. due to changes that the department made, when Duncan's performance in D.C. was not solely a result of their efforts. And Robert, you can go into the details on that.
During the term of the contract, the Washington, D.C. had a parking citation amnesty program. In other words, individuals who had outstanding parking citations could come in and pay and have a reduced amount to pay. They also had fine increases as far as their parking citation increase, and they also had an increase in the issuance amount, and the number of tickets being issued, so you have a larger pool to draw from. The information that was provided by Duncan in the RFP was the increase in revenue as opposed to an increase in the collection rate. We try to find a measure that's objective, and we can also look and see how we would do it here if that were to be replicated.
And what we attempted to do in our report is identify for you the increase in collections rate that Xerox has actually performed in Los Angeles. We did not give credit to Xerox because the council raised rates a number of times in the past years. We gave them credit because they improved their performance on collections rate.
Okay. My point with the question is not so much the substance of the argument as the fact that the Washington, D.C. example and its history was something that staff considered during the bid process in ranking the respondents. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this information you're providing us today, that's all interesting, but more to the point, you considered it in ranking the bidders.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the city controller has made a number of audits of Xerox's performance, well, I should say, parking violations processes, whether involving Xerox or the department over the years. And there are a number of recommendations that the controller has offered for improved performance. Can you comment upon those recommendations and their status of being implemented?
Certainly. The recommendations that we included in this request for proposal were to exclude the payment for avoided citations, to eliminate the gold card desk, develop performance goals for collections, ensure compliance with respect to the collection tools, including the credit bureau reporting, as well as court referrals, and to explore making phone calls to debtors earlier in the selection process. And penalties should be meted out for contract deliverables not being met. So all those particular recommendations from the Controller's Office were included in the RFP.
Okay. So as of now, how many of the Controller's recommendations have been implemented?
Currently, we've implemented all of them in our day-to-day operations.
Okay. Now, one of the recommendations that the CAO included, since you mentioned the performance goals issue, is that some specific benchmark be included in the contract with specific performance goals, and that the goals would have milestones and periodic review and so on and so forth. And I guess my question is, if we have a single vendor doing this, what would be the accountability for failure to meet those goals? What would be the consequences of failure to meet those benchmarks? And I assume that's something that would be negotiated if a contract were awarded, but maybe not with specifics, but structurally, how would you hold a single contractor accountable other than finding them to be in breach?
We've looked at other cities and how they use performance measures and how they involve financial penalties for not meeting certain criteria. In other words, if they don't meet a collection rate of X, then they get penalized a certain financial amount. And that's determined partly from probably negotiations as well as conversations with other agencies, either their finance group or others. I think that's what we would do here as well.
You could have some kind of penalty provision, a liquidated damages kind of provision or something if they fail to meet specific benchmarks, I assume, right?
I think it would be a combination of liquidated damages and/or a letter of credit, which the city could draw down if they failed to meet a performance goal.
All right. Now, I don't want to monopolize, so I'm going to pass this on before I come back with some more comments. But the one comment I do want to make in response to staff's response to Mr. Kretz with regard to the most favored nation clause, I'm pretty concerned that Xerox has not provided those reports. I'm pleased that you have taken the initiative to go out and contact other government agencies and compare contracts, and that's great. And it's good that you've determined that those are very different contracts and have different financial structures, whatever. But that kind of misses the point. The point is that's Xerox's job, and Xerox should be reporting to us, and their failure to do that imposes an administrative burden on the department, which is unacceptable, number one, and number two, it leaves open the possibility that we are not catching the benefits that the city is due under that negotiated clause of that contract. So whatever else happens here today, I just want to make very clear to everybody in this room that I'm pretty unhappy about that and will absolutely be following up on that. And I've got some more comments, but let me just turn it over.
No, we do agree that Xerox should have been providing those reports. We will follow up with them. We will get those reports, and if it's determined by staff that we should have been receiving a lower price, we will apply that retroactively for the period in question.
Okay, Mr.
I'll go last.
Okay. Mr. Parks.
Yes, let me just, a couple of questions. Somebody mentioned earlier about the recommendations that did not, no one had recommended a split of the contract. Did the original RFP have that as a requirement that you go out and ask for the contract to be split or give you options?
The original RFP listed 4 different options that each of the vendors that responded was supposed to provide pricing for each of those options.
And one of them was...
And one of them was to collections only.
Collections only, processing only?
Correct.
Okay. And then also, in one of the, I guess, negotiations after the bid had been offered, there was discussion about a guarantee. Is that on the processing or on the collections?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
It's somewhere in the discussion, they talked about a guarantee being discussed with Xerox. Was that on the processing or the collections?
I think, if I recall correctly, it was after the baffle statements were provided, there was a question regarding the language within the RFP.
I can speak to that, sir. Wayne Garcia from the Department of Transportation. I was on the evaluation committee, and there was a specific page within the special collections section from Xerox that stated with their new managed collections model, they would be able to increase collections of $12 million. So I asked for clarification on what that $12 million meant. Was it gross or net? And also, was there a guarantee?
Is that after Xerox had been offered the contract?
Yeah, that's after the evaluation committee already made the selection of Xerox.
And so the key is that, but it was, again, remind me, is it on processing or collections?
Collections.
Collections. Okay. And then someone mentioned earlier about the assessing the different portions of the contract. And what I'm wondering, can we actually get an accurate assessment of what Duncan can do on the collections if we've never gone and gotten a thorough evaluation of their paragraph and their best offer letter to find out what the guarantee was? Could we actually make an assessment without having...
Of the different, when the baffle, you mean all the different conditions that they allow?
You made a comment earlier that in assessing the two proposals, that you said that there was difference in dollars and that there was, you had made this assessment as to why Xerox was the better company and the things of that nature. But one of the things I'm wondering about is that if you never followed up on the final and best offer letter in which the conversation was about guarantees, could you really make an accurate assessment as to comparing the two companies?
I think that the panel looked at the letter, the baffle in its entirety. There was 4 different conditions that they indicated would be able to generate the additional revenue that the city, that they referenced in their initial conversation. First condition was that they reduced their baffle price, so they took credit for a reduction in their processing cost. The second, they said that they had enhanced collection strategies that would result in $10 to $12 or $15 million additionally. They also suggested that the city increase the special collections fee by $11 and use that money to pay for the incremental difference. And finally, they also indicated that the city could generate substantial more money by increasing issuance from 2.6 to 2.9, and then from 2.9 to 3.2 within a 2-year period. So that's how they arrived at their total dollar amount that would be available to the city.
But we didn't interview them about that.
No, I think that the panel reviewed the information provided. The first one, the baffle, I think that speaks for itself. Second one, the enhanced collection strategies. And the enhanced collection strategies, in the RFP, we mandated certain collection activities be performed by either vendor, so both of them would have to respond to that. They would both be both mandated to provide those collection strategies. The third one was the $11 in additional special collections fees. If the council elected to do that, you could do that with either vendor, so that would be a push.
I just want to clarify, when you got that letter, was there any interview or discussion with them as to what that meant? Because I thought the last meeting we had, someone was critical that they didn't present a letter of credit, they didn't give more depth. And I'm just wondering, did we ever interview to get that kind of information?
No, just to be clear, we did not follow up after they submitted the BAFO. We considered the BAFO in its entirety. Where Duncan wanted to, they were very specific in both their original proposal as well as their BAFO. In other areas, they were not specific. The reason we characterized their alleged guarantee as not a guarantee is all they said in the letter is, we will guarantee this. They did not describe to the city the mechanism by which they would provide that guarantee. They had the opportunity to put that in their written proposal. In other areas where they want to be specific, as Mr. Andalon indicated, they were very meticulous point by point saying what the assumptions were in making their assertions. They did not provide any detail on the alleged financial guarantee.
Would that have violated anything had we called and inquired?
I don't know if it would violate anything. All I know is they did not provide any detail in their BAFO.
It was the discussion was we had no obligation, but had we taken that step, would we have violated the betterments or whatever the language is?
I think the city attorney could probably address that particular point.
I mean, this is before you offered the contract.
This is before we selected.
Before we made a recommendation
to the.
Did you violate anything if you had contacted them to get more information as to what that paragraph meant?
Well, I think it was not necessarily a paragraph, but just a sentence that Duncan is willing to guarantee X amount of revenue.
Would you violate anything if you had called about the sentence?
I'm not sure if we would have violated it. I think that when the panel looked at it, it looked at its in entirety as to what the conditions were and whether we felt that those were reasonable conditions.
Then someone earlier mentioned that it would increase, I think, $5 million if you separate. Where did that figure and what does that include? Mr. Chair?
That's in our, it's in,
The figure is $5 million per year. That is based on the lowest price for processing only was submitted by Xerox,
That would
which,
have been $5 million added to Xerox contract?
yes. If
So
you
what-
split it, the council will end up paying Xerox over the period of 5 years, approximately $25 million more to do only the processing. And that is going to be a guaranteed price increase. And then the council would have to decide whether they have confidence that Duncan is going to increase revenue through the collections effort, at least $5 million a year.
That's what I want to clarify. It wasn't $5 million in the sense of loss on the Duncan side. It was an additional cost on the Xerox side.
that's correct.
Yes.
The other thing I was wondering, although there has been several comments made as to Duncan having contracts and losing out to Xerox as in the renewal process, have we determined if that ever occurred in the reverse?
There have been instances where Xerox lost contracts to Duncan. I think what we did is looked at the contracts within the California to determine what the environment, because that would be more similar to what we're doing here in Los Angeles than, for example, in Detroit.
So we determined that that did occur?
Yes, it did.
Okay, do we know how many?
There's Detroit, there's Somerville, there's probably another one, but I don't recall that one off the top of my head.
Okay. But again, in our conversation, it seems like the only ones we mentioned was when Duncan lost out to Xerox. We never commented the reverse.
To be clear, the department did not use the recent success or failure by either company as part of the evaluation criteria.
I know.
That those are the statements being made by both of the proposers about each other. That was not an explicit evaluation criteria.
But I think the staff mentioned it in their presentation.
Well, I think that when we looked at the overall market, we also looked at what was occurring within California specifically.
I'll just make my final statement. Those are my questions. And I think somebody earlier mentioned the controller's audit. And as I mentioned at our last meeting, my concern about the controller's audit, it appeared that there were many things that were fundamentally just basic stuff that should be done, particularly if a contract has been in place for 20-some years. Yet, in this contract, we're adding them as though they were new criteria as far as guidelines, timetables, and goals, which I would think had the company been in place that long, that would have been stuff they were doing as a fundamental part of their job.
We agree that the current contract should have been better, and that's why we're recommending the improvements to the recommended contract.
Thank you.
I know Mr. Labange wants to make one quick comment, but then...
Did your commission consider this?
The commission was part of the protest panel, and they reviewed our presentation, and they supported the staff recommendation.
Was there this much interest of civically minded people at a transportation committee in central Los Angeles that day?
Not as much as there is today,
Thank you
sir.
very much.
Okay. Mr. Weezer.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. Just to be clear, there was a slideshow presentation at the last Transportation Committee, and there was a slide, I believe, on the advantages or disadvantages of separating collections and processing. What are those again? What are the advantages and disadvantages aside from the additional cost to split it, which may be covered or not?
The
Well, even if you can't find the slide, I mean, what are the advantages and disadvantages from your point of view?
Well, the advantages, other than the cost, there is a one vendor that's ultimately responsible for all customer service aspects. The disadvantage, you have administrative oversight over two different contractors. It's not to say it's impossible. It's just an additional burden. I think that we felt that the risk associated with transferring was not necessarily one we could recommend. And so that's coupled with the cost, we felt that that was the more appropriate.
I remember the risk. You mentioned there's risk, but what is that risk?
The risk would be is that they may not collect as much as we're collecting now.
Because it's separate?
It's separate. They may not have the same capacity to handle all of the mailings, the noticing, the phone calls that come with it. If someone feels as though that they've received an incorrect ticket and they only call once it goes into special collections. Right now, you have one vendor that handles that situation. They have specific business rules that we provide them that they have to adhere to. We have monthly meetings that we go over their customer service. We listen to their phone calls with the constituents to determine who's telling the truth. We also, under the vehicle code, the processing and collections can be combined. In fact, both vendors have multiple cities where they have bundled services, so there's not necessarily an inherent conflict of interest. We have city employees performing the hearings now, so that there is a separate group that's actually hearing. It's not related at all to the parking processing side of the house.
The same report also said that Duncan could provide the processing with no problem. I'm sorry, the collections with no problem. I thought I read somewhere as well that they provide superior collection services. Is that accurate?
In the actual evaluation, some of the panel members felt that Duncan provided a better collection performance. However, when you look at the actual RFP, you start to look at for example, they would do more outbound calling earlier, but that would only be true if they were actually processing. Since they're not processing, they're not going to be doing any outbound calling until that's actually assigned to them. They also felt that the Washington, D.C. Revenue increase was actually sort of swayed them to believe that they actually had done a better job. But when you look at the actual information provided and you do the background check to determine why, it's not clear that it was all of their efforts.
Okay, thank you.
Please, Mr. Perez. And then Mr. Labange, if you'd like to speak again, and also Mr. Gregorio.
Yeah, I have some questions on collection rates. I wonder if we could have a representative from Xerox and a representative from Duncan come up to speak to that specific issue.
Mr. Perez, explain what you're asking for again.
First for Duncan, what's your general collection rate in California?
Okay, folks, these are serious questions. We got to hear all this. Please come on up, too, because you guys will be up next.
Yeah, still people chatting in the audience, too. So.
Okay, let's keep it down, folks. These sensitive questions are key to where we take this. Please.
Mr. Chair, if I can I suggest that I give an overview of the rates that both companies submitted to us, which was presented at the Transportation Committee, but just so the Budget and Finance Committee members also have the benefit of that.
Fine.
Because this is based on the information that both companies submitted. Xerox, in all of their contracts in the United States, had a range of 64% to 87%. And they had a national average, a weighted average of 77%. Duncan had a range of 63%, so they had the lowest, to 94%, which was also the highest in the nation. They had a weighted average of 80%. This was for fiscal year 2011. Just as a note, Xerox's rate was the same for the prior year, fiscal year 2010. Duncan's rate the prior year was 82%. So Duncan's rate decreased nationally by 2% based on the data they submitted to the department. By way of background, the last completed fiscal year for the City of LA was 2012, and during that year, Xerox achieved an 84% collections rate. So their rate in Los Angeles, our actual experience with them, is higher than the average of either Xerox nationally or Duncan nationally. And the point I made at the prior committee, and the reason I wanted to preface your questions to both companies, is we looked at the entirety of the performance of both companies as well as our actual experience with Xerox. We did not give special credit because Duncan had the highest collection rate in one city in the United States, but we also did not penalize them because they had the lowest. We looked at the totality of the data submitted by both companies in looking at the collections. It's been stated over and over again as that we did score Duncan slightly higher in collections, but I want to point out to the committee that even if you decide to split the contract, you should also be considering the other evaluation criteria, which includes corporate capability and any risk associated with that, as well as price, any risk associated with that, and then ultimately the combined processing and collections risk by splitting the contract. So I did want to provide those numbers. Those are the numbers that were provided to the department. Those were the numbers that were considered in formulating our recommendation. Maybe the city attorney can speak to whether the council should be considering data that has not been submitted to the department as part of the RFP.
No, they should not. Nothing can be submitted that was not contained either in the proposal or the best and final offer at this point. It would be a violation of 10.15 FP, or F10, I'm sorry, of the Los Angeles Administrative Code.
So does that mean I can't ask any of these questions?
I don't know
You can
what
ask him,
questions
he'll
you're
tell
going to
you
ask.
what you can do and not do. Paul, go for it.
So I would ask Duncan, for instance, what cities in which do you operate where you're above an 80% collection rate?
So I'm happy to point to information we provided in our proposal.
Right, you can do that.
We're in, I must say this is a first. I'm in the awkward position of defending the department's report from the department. But having said that, I have the copy sitting right in front of me from Xerox's proposal. And it shows that in 2010, they had an 82% collection rate for LA. In 2011, they had an 81%. And in 2012, they had a 79%. I asked for the data that would support the PowerPoint, which shows that somehow they are improving, and we were denied that information from the department. So it's difficult to go any other than what was submitted in here. Xerox provided collection rate data for 16 cities. We provided it for 18. The use of a range is to suggest that we're all over the board. For 2011, of the 18 cities that Duncan provided information in the proposal, one of our cities had a collection rate underneath 68%. You hear it's a range. 31%, 5 out of Xerox's 16 that they submitted had a collection rate below 68%. What's getting washed out during this process, including just completely, which we've been documented for the record with respect to DC, right? Indeed, there's a very easy way to calculate collection rate when you split the program, and it's to look at the yield. When a client assigns you $1 to collect, how much do you collect? Prior to us taking over in DC, right? So this is independent of fine increases, which, by the way, it was misstated. You can speak to DC. There have been no fine increases since Duncan has been there. Yes, issuance went up a little. Not so much issuance, but how much has been assigned to us, right? So for every dollar that was assigned to Duncan in Washington, to Xerox in Washington, DC, they collected 21 cents, right? And they had the program for 20 years. Starting in 2008 with us, we now collect over 40 cents on every dollar that's assigned to us. And you heard mention of an amnesty. That's adjusting out the impact of the amnesty, which is a one-time issue that occurs over a 6-month period, and it basically comes in the last 3 weeks. We had a 48% yield, 48 cents if you don't include the amnesty. So out of a 6-year period, we're talking about a bump that happened over less than a quarter. So to sit here and to hear things like our performance in D.C. has somehow misled the committee is deeply troubling. The other thing equally troubling is to suggest that we're not solvent. That's just a ludicrous statement. We've never lost any contract based on that. We're a growing company that's generating operating cash flow. So I just can't say enough how strenuously this just completely mischaracterizes the department that already determined, and your own finance department, that Duncan is a fully capable firm of performing collections. By the way, with respect to the 7 secondary collection vendors, only 3 of them even have DMV requester codes. So all 7 of these, 4 of them aren't even in the vehicle-based collections. So the fact that there's going to be administrative costs for splitting the program, they're going to be administrative costs because you're going to go to up to 3 secondary collection vendors, whether you do it after 3 months or after 15 months. So I apologize, in answer to your question, the RFP said that Los Angeles had an 82% collection rate. Xerox's own information suggested that they submitted using a rigorous formula was lower than that. Duncan's California collection rate was 85%. And we've got numerous cities. We've heard about Berkeley, right? Our collection rate in Berkeley is 88 to 91% over the last 3 years, okay? Cities like, I've got this, there are numerous others where we exceed 85% collection rates in California. This isn't a close call that they'd have you believe now. And with respect to the risk associated with it, first of all, the whole $150 million is not a risk. This is the collections portion of it, which represents $48 million. Were there to be risk, which certainly there'd be, that was the point of our guarantee. And by the way, it's page 3 of the recommendation clearly states, based on the pricing and the proposals, the city would need to secure a minimum annual increase in collections of $4 million. I don't know where this $5 million has come from. All of the documentation show that the increased processing cost is $4 million a year. To the extent that Duncan is willing to guarantee that and more, the risk is removed. And that would be the point, obviously, of negotiating with both parties to find out how real is our guarantee. If we're some Potemkin village that can't get our, a guarantee, then the department will come back to you and say, boy, Duncan, we were right. They pulled one. If we can provide a letter of credit or whatever other vehicle, then you'll have that. That's as good as cash.
If we could, just from a timing standpoint, I'd like her to be able to make a comment. You spoke just now for over 3 minutes. So make one comment at least, so we get some fairness here.
And maybe before you do that, I can throw in a question or two that you might answer in the process of it. Xerox has had this contract for a long time. What's your average been of collections over that entire period? And what's your lowest year been and your highest year?
The lowest year was the first year we started. We took this over from LA Municipal Court. This is back in the 1980s when Tom Bradley first asked us to come in to work on collections as a result of the Olympics. And the collection rate at that time when we took over was 50%. We have increased that significantly year over year. And we are up in the 80s now, 80% range, and had been in the 80% range probably for the last 5 to 6 years. I don't have all 3 years, but all 5 years ahead of me, but I have 3 years right here in front of me.
What's your average over the 25 years?
The average of the 25 years? I would guess it's probably in the high 70s, early 80s, if you add all that when we were first starting.
So nobody ever asked you that? You don't have that information?
For all 25 years, no. No one's ever asked me that question. And frankly, the sanctions that we have been allowed to use in terms of policy of the city have also become, they've allowed us to do more aggressive sanctions. For example, in the early days, Joe Wax didn't want any phone calls going out to constituents. He didn't want us to make outbound phone calls. I know some of you may know him. The mayor was reticent to have us really pound people for parking tickets. Obviously, in the economic crisis that we've been in the last couple of years. Beg pardon?
Which mayor wanted you to pound people?
Which mayor?
Didn't.
I would say progressively the last couple of mayors have been much more interested in revenue generation than previous mayors. Not that all the mayors are interested in revenue generation.
Mr. Bradley was more kind than, let's say, Mr. Vera.
He was a kinder, gentler mayor.
For the record.
Through time, to answer your question, Councilman Koretz, we weren't allowed to do outbound phone calls up until recently. Credit bureau marking up until recently. We've been, sending notices, going up to the DMV, hitting the franchise tax board. That's when if you have money coming back after a tax refund, they can attach that and send the money back to the city of Los Angeles instead of giving you that portion, whatever you owe to the city. So there's been progressive policy changes within our partners, the Department of Transportation, as well as city mindset to take a more serious stance on these.
Yeah, if I could ask one more question for our general manager. So we heard Duncan and their opinion on what their numbers have been. We seem to have other numbers in the report. How do we figure out what the real numbers are? What are they actually collecting over the last few years? Are they collecting less or are they collecting more? Because we're hearing conflicting things.
Yes. Just to recap, Councilman, based on the numbers submitted by both companies, we concluded that the average rate of collection for Xerox nationally was 77%. Duncan was 80% for fiscal year 2011. When you look at the trends from the prior year, Duncan was also at 77%. In fiscal year 2010, they actually had a very marginal increase in their average. Duncan's average dropped from 82% to 80%, based on the data provided by both companies. So I think part of the challenge I've had in this conversation is, to be frank, everybody's selectively quoting the data that helps their side. What staff did was look at all of the data presented by both companies, analyzed it rigorously, and that is the information we presented in our written report as well as during our PowerPoint and verbal presentations to this committee and the Transportation Committee previously.
How can different people be looking at the same data and coming up with different percentages? I mean, Duncan says they're actually increasing slightly into the 80s. We're saying they're actually decreasing slightly. What's the real story? How do we have a different disagreement over the same numbers?
I don't know. I mean, we'd be happy to provide the original submittals from both companies if everybody wants to pull out a spreadsheet. We've already done that analysis internally. We're confident in the calculations we made and the presentation of the data that we've made to both committees.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, we can pass out copies for the committee members and point you to pages from the proposal.
Well, we want to make sure the city attorney feels that this is in the context of the discussion.
It's from the proposal.
I understand, but I want
Mr. Chair, to be honest with you, I think we're quibbling over details. I don't think that Xerox has not said that they have a better average collection rate than Duncan. Duncan has said they have a better average collection rate, and the department is saying that Xerox's actual performance for the city of LA is better than the national average for both companies. I think those are the important numbers.
Are we up to it? Or are we finished?
I don't know. It's still not a clear issue for me. I don't know if it'll get clearer looking at your figures or not.
Yes, Mr.
Well, I've been around here a long time. You're a very nice guy. You're a very nice person, excuse me. The department makes a determination based on what they think is best for the city of Los Angeles. I feel you're pressing me. You're pressing me to say you're better. There was a process. They went through a process. The CAO, which is independent of the department, reviewed it. The general manager of the Department of Transportation is a very structured numbers person, in so many ways, from his past experience in budgeting for the city. So it's very clear to me, if we wanted to say, this is what the CAO said, and let's go forward with this as we move forward. I think it will cost higher if you have two companies. I also think, too, name one NFL team. You look like a smart guy, knows football, right? Name one NFL team who won a championship with two quarterbacks. Alternate.
Miami Dolphins, undefeated season.
No, they were the guy. You want another one? No.
Earl Morrall and Johnny Unitas for the Colts.
Yeah, but it wasn't that Morrall played it down and then Unitas played it down. You're very good there, 1972. But it was because the guy got hurt and the other guy got hurt, and it was because their defense and kicking game did it. Enough said.
Wait, didn't there...
And they weren't on the field at the same time either, or else that would have been a real problem. Yeah, two quarterbacks at the same time.
Didn't the Rams have one in the 50s?
No, they didn't.
Okay. Did you want to say anything, or can we have a summary done by the department?
Waterfield and Van Brock.
Yeah.
Pulls that one out.
What was that?
Another one was Waterfield and Van Brock.
That's what I was thinking of.
And now you're digging deep, Mr. Parks. I have another question.
1950-ish.
If I may, are you
Yeah.
this side done? So, Mr. De La Vega, when I was looking at this chart that compares Xerox combined, Duncan combined, Xerox processing, Duncan processing.
Yes.
The one thing that isn't compared in this is the end result of the policy question that's being proposed to us, which is what would happen if you took Xerox processing, added it to Duncan collections, made a budget assumption about what the likely revenue changes would be, added in the administrative costs to do that change, and then compare, where would that be on this chart? I mean, is there some way that we can figure out what the, net, or did you figure out what the net result of that in comparison to the other options?
Yeah, that chart did not present that for this reason is Duncan's evidence shows a range of collection rates, and they have the average that I just discussed. We felt that based on Xerox's actual performance and their increasing performance with the City of LA compared to Duncan's collections rate, that there was not going to be a significant guaranteed increase in collections that would result in more revenue. So we didn't feel like we should recommend to the council and to the mayor spending more money for the possibility that there might be more revenue. That's essentially what Duncan's arguing. Duncan is saying, we're going to get you more money, and that's going to cover the increased costs that you're going to pay to Xerox. The department's assessment of that is there's not a guarantee. Their collection rate does not give us 100% confidence or even a significant level of confidence that we're going to see that increased revenue. Mr. Nichols did say that, he says the California rate for Duncan is 85%. Their national rate for the 2 years they submitted is 80. It's not 85, it's 80, so that's selectively presenting certain data. I don't know if we split the contract what Duncan's performance will be. It could be as low as 63% because that's documented in their own figures. It could be as high as 94%. It could be the average. It could be any number.
And if I may, that's
Yes.
the point is that you can't really make an apples to apples comparison when you add in anticipated revenue as well, because there is a different track record. But aside from that, it's not entirely quantifiable for purposes of comparison with a cost comparison.
That's correct. And, had Duncan's national average, for example, been 5 percentage points higher than what Xerox is performing for the city, I think we'd be having a different conversation.
We might decide that's a good idea to do, but I think for purposes of today's discussion, first of all, we've been already told that we can't consider the guarantee in this decision before us today.
Actually, you can consider the statement that was made in the BAFO. And that statement,
Right. Okay.
I believe I can cite it for you.
Right, okay. But the issue is, are we willing to make that policy choice and accept the increased risk of a lesser-known quantity, who has a fine track record, but it's just not in Los Angeles?
That's correct.
With regard to $45 million in collection revenues. So what is so they've raised the point, Duncan has raised the point, and I want your response to this, because I think it's a point somewhat well taken, which is the department is already concluding that there's going to be administrative costs in that transfer of collections authority to Duncan in this case. But they've argued that the council's already made that decision by adding the secondary collections agencies, so there is going to be some administrative costs in transferring that responsibility to other agencies anyway. All we're doing now is moving up that transfer from the end of the line in secondary collections to the beginning of the line in primary collections. Why is that not correct? Or to what extent is that? How do the two things differ?
Yeah, I think that's partially correct. I don't think that the committee should overemphasize the increased administrative costs. The nature of those costs are going to be primarily in contract administration, having two contracts interfacing with two different companies, sending out two different sets of invoices or payments. It's also going to require staff time to ensure that the data is being transferred between the two companies and reconciled so that we can report accurately to the council and mayor. That may result in us coming back to the council during the contract saying we need additional staff resources. I can't quantify for you specifically what those costs are, but that's the nature of the increased administrative costs. I think more importantly is the additional $5 million a year. And, just to clarify the report, the reason the report said at least $4 million a year, and the reason we're quoting 5, is that in both Duncan and Xerox's proposals, they had increasing costs each year. So just to make the discussion easier, we've taken the average of $5 million a year.
Okay.
So in year 1, it'd be 4, and in year 5, it would be closer to 6.
Okay. So I want to I think, close with a couple of thoughts. First of all, I really appreciate, Mr. Chairman, that you've chaired a joint meeting of our committees, and I think this has been a great opportunity to really get in depth into a lot of substantive information, which has been valuable to me. And I've certainly listened carefully to everybody in this and tried to do the best I can to assess as Mr. LeBlanc says, different sets of data, and so everybody in every argument chooses what's advantageous to their side. That doesn't surprise me. That's what you're supposed to do as an advocate. I guess where I come down on this is that there is a difficulty in quantifying the risk that we're exposing one of the top 10 sources of revenue that this city has to. And, when we talk about other things, Mr. Parks has spoken frequently about, the risk of changing the business tax, for example, the impact, and I agree that there's significant risk when we talk about any changes to our revenue stream. It may work, it might not work, and where we're at now, I need a pretty high level of burden of proof to be met before I'm comfortable taking a risk on any aspect of our revenue stream. The other thing that concerns me about this is, we're trying to make the city a place that attracts business and that encourages people to come and do business here and to deal with the city. And the complaint that I hear the most often is that City Hall makes it really hard to do business here. And a lot of times that's because of what council does at the 11th hour. And so I'm cognizant of the message that we might send if we make a policy decision to split a contract after going through an extensive process of staff evaluation and otherwise. I'm a little concerned that that sends a message to the business community that they might submit a bid, participate in our RFP process, and then we get to the end of the line on it and the council decides to change that and have a do-over. And I'm concerned. We only had 2 bidders on this. Granted, there aren't a lot of other players in this particular marketplace, but we frequently are getting fewer bidders than we should, and I think part of the reason is that because council sticks its nose into these things at the last minute, after we have a whole process and our staff has had an opportunity to consider things thoroughly. So those are a couple of the concerns that I have that would lead me, I think, towards supporting the CAO's recommendations. Mr. Englander.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak before he does?
No, go ahead.
I just have one question, just to clarify. When we say that there's an administrative cost to have this separated, isn't it a fact that currently it is separated, that Xerox has subcontractors that do the collection?
The answer is yes and no, Councilman. Let me elaborate. Yes, they currently have subcontractors, but from a DOT city perspective, we only administer a single contract and make payments to Xerox. Any financial arrangement with subcontractors is handled by Xerox. If there's an administrative cost there, that is borne by Xerox.
But when we talk about administrative costs, we're talking about people that are on the payroll doing these?
I'm talking about Mr. Wayne Garcia in the audience and his staff who actually do the contract administration, and then Mr. Andalon's accounting staff that processes the
People that
money.
are on the payroll?
Yes.
Okay. But the key is that currently subcontractors do the collection now. They just happen to get paid by Xerox.
Subcontractors do some of the collections for Xerox.
Okay, who does the rest?
Xerox does the rest. And then they also,
On the
yeah,
process.
Xerox collects, and then they also have a subcontractor named Harris & Harris. They actually added them to their current operation, and they're also proposed in their bid. And just by way of reference, Harris & Harris is also one of the bench firms that you approved for the Department of Finance.
Let me just go over it
Yep.
so I'm clear. Xerox does the processing in the sense of the recovery of money on the processing. Do they also have a role in recovering money on the What's the other part?
Collections.
Collections.
Yes.
Okay, so they do collections as Xerox employees, but they have a subcontractor that assists them.
Yes, and maybe the Xerox representative can explain how that work is broken down.
Yes. Councilman, Xerox does a variety of collection activities. Some of those activities are handled by subcontractors. For example, the outbound phone calling is done by one of our subcontractors. But, Xerox goes up to the franchise tax board, marks credit, sends notices, handles all the customer service questions about the tickets, et
What I'm
cetera.
interested in is the collection.
I'm sorry? This is all in collections. This is all in
Not the
collections.
phone calls, but I'm saying the issue of the collections. Who does that?
Xerox does it along with two of our partners. So there are many activities, depending on which activity you're talking about. Some are subbed out to collection companies that work for Xerox. Xerox is also considered a collection company because we do the collections as well.
And you pay that subcontractor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Englander.
Well, I've been listening to all the great questions that have been asked, and I can't remember the last time we had one contract so politicized. It reminds me of the statement that I'd read, actually, because I wasn't here at the time, but Mr. LaBonge, I'm sure, will correct the record if I get it wrong, but I did read it in Greg Smith's book,
Gil Lindsey.
Gil Lindsey, and I got friends on this side of the room, and I've got friends on this side of the room. At the end of the day, I'm voting with my friends. So with that, I think we've really asked all the questions that were asked of us to ask as well. I'll let you interpret that as you must. And after having read actually all the documents that I did, I can tell you that I'm very comfortable with the fact that staff really did a thorough job. That we're sitting here in a political process and not really the evaluation of staff, as often is the case. And sometimes in that political process, though, there are things that are found. In this case, there were things that were discovered, and it was reiterated by the department. It was reiterated as well and memorialized in the city attorney opinion, because I feel that the city attorney actually did a pretty good job, but we can't talk about that document. And the controller's audit that was referenced earlier as well, the fact that they found, according to page 6 of the document from the CAO, 23 recommendations, all 22 of them have been implemented, and the remaining recommendation is part of the new process in the contract. It's hard to hold current contracts accountable to things that weren't part of their original contract. One question that I only had really one question, is what we were talking about, the difference in the bifurcation of $25 million over a 5-year period. With that, this contract is 5 years, and only 5 years. Is there an option to renew? Often our contracts have that.
Yeah, the staff recommendation as well as the CEO recommendation is a 5-year contract with a 1-year option.
With a 1-year option, we're really talking about probably $30 million.
That's correct.
$25 million. And then by the time the city drags their feet at that point, carries it on, goes for another RFP. That RFP is then thrown out because it's challenged in court. We go out again, come back, go through the same process, and then have a joint committee after it's been appealed and go to council. We're in it for another year. So we're really at about $35 million, perhaps. Just trying to follow the logic in the process. Okay.
I'm guessing that's why they recommended the 1-year option.
Yes, okay. So with that, the points that were made by our CAO, the points that were made by our staff, the general manager, who I feel really did a thorough analysis outside of the politics of it, is the fact that they claim superiority. That's in staffing, equipment, training, according to the documents. That alone goes a long way. The lower cost, which is a significant issue. The risk, which I think Mr. Kokorian clearly articulated, and as the vice chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, I take that the revenue streams very seriously as we look at our future overall outlook and our projected deficits. We've got to be very, very careful and cautious of those risks. The customer service aspect,
is critically important. These are people who are already upset because they've gotten a ticket for something they did wrong, probably, but that's another issue. As an LAPD officer, I can tell you not too many people say, "Thank you, officer. You've probably saved my life for writing me this ticket." Right, Mr. Parks? We didn't get that often, I don't think. Never wrote tickets. I drew the short straw. That's why he was chief. And anyway, and so the customer service aspect is critically important when they call in. The administrative oversight of having to oversee one contract versus two. We already know full well that we're short-handed with administrative oversight, particularly as it pertains to transportation funds. And we should all applaud our general manager that's sitting right here, that we were able to close out our current year's budget process and going into the next fiscal year with $42 million that his department, through a controller's recommendation and working with the council, found $42 million at the close of this fiscal year going into next year. And that's because we just don't have enough people for oversight into all these different funds and special funds. And so this again would require additional staff, you said, that could create that. That's a huge risk. That goes well beyond that. I therefore, after all the discussions and all the questions, I recommend that we move forward with the recommendation from the CAO and forward this on to council.
Okay, I haven't said a word on all of this. Yes, go ahead.
And I'm looking for a second on that.
I will second that, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not totally closed to this option, but unfortunately, after all this discussion, I'm still not convinced over the main issue for me, which is which results in more revenue. I mean, I've certainly been spending my last 4 years looking at every corner and every $500,000, $1 million here and there we can pick up. I'm not convinced, based on what we've heard, that the other firm doesn't have a better track record on collections and more ability and might actually bring in more money. Now, some of that's based on things that weren't in the RFP, and some things that we can ask and some things that we can't ask. I'm still not sure a compelling case has been made on that one issue. Is it more risky? I guess so. I mean, you've had one company doing it for 25 years, pretty much the same. No huge hiccups, so there's obviously not a great risk there. But there's also not great signs of an ability to jump up our revenue. So if I felt comfortable that the other factors weren't going to come into play, I would probably want to see us bifurcate this contract. So I'm not exactly sure where that leaves me.
Well, you can vote one way or the other.
I could vote one way or the other. I could make a substitute motion that we go back and redo the RFP. I mean, there are other things that we could do, but I'm trying to get a sense of where my colleagues are and what's rational. But I'm just putting out there that I'm still not totally comfortable with the answer, that it's just an open and shut case on this.
If I can address one thing.
Please, go ahead.
Just not to counter that, but just to address one thing. One of the things that Mr. Krikorian had pointed out earlier is we far too often split these types of contracts or have these discussions in committee at the 11th hour, I believe is what was stated, to split contracts, and it makes the city much less business friendly. In fact, this was actually bid that way, to do that. It afforded for that. It looked at that opportunity. In fact, I think I was grateful when I looked at all the documents that this wasn't done in a political manner, but actually the department went out to bid in that fashion, asking for it back. We've received the information back. The analysis says it will cost us more money. It's not a matter of, I think, guesswork of whether we want to take a risk or not. It's based on their evaluation. It's really a question of, do we trust their evaluation or not? Based on documents that may have been received outside of this process. I have not received any documents outside of this process, but I know much has been circulated. But I'm relying on what I have received from the CAO, the city attorney, as well as the department. But I just wanted to make that point because I know that's a big part of the discussion.
Okay, Mr. Parks, final comment, and then I'll make a final comment.
Okay.
And then we'll vote.
All right, I'd just like to say that I'm not supportive of the CAO's recommendation, and I would like to see a recommendation that goes to council that we basically bifurcate the contract for enforcement and collections, and that we then open up those negotiations with DOT to discuss with both companies the guarantees on either side, and to continue that negotiation until they can bring us the best proposal for collections of our enforcement program. I'd also recommend that Xerox stays on a month-to-month until all that can get resolved, and that, in my mind, is short of asking for a new RFP. I think the original RFP, in my mind, covered all of the points that were necessary. I just am concerned as to the administration of the RFP and believe that, as I mentioned at the last T committee, that we short-stop the process by offering one company a contract, knowing that they were similarly situated as it relates to a cost that was above what we were expecting to pay. So that cut out our conversation with one company, and then we immediately sought approval from the mayor's office to negotiate a better price with the company we selected. And so I think as we saw LADOT deal with contracts on dash buses over time, we've seen them deal with parking meters over time. They have over time given us a better sense that they've worked with the competitors and came up with the best pricing for the city and the best program. And so I'm not going to support the recommendation as it sets. I believe we'd be in better shape to continue the negotiation if the council chooses to open up the process, as it appears we have that authority.
If I could ask the city attorney to react to that, is there?
He needs a second,
I'll second it.
and then we got to vote on it.
Yeah, he'll second it, but I just want you to respond to this whole discussion at this point.
If you're referring to the options that you have, as there's previously stated, you have the option to, at full council, to recommend that the department grant the award to Xerox, the entire contract. You have the option, full council does, to split the contract and ask the general manager to go back and negotiate the various terms within those two contracts. Or you have the option of using city employees to do the entire thing as well. Those are your options. Or you could throw the RFP out as well.
Okay, so we have two motions on the floor.
And I have a question, Mr. Chair. Given that, under any of those circumstances, when a contract is ready to be let, that contract would still need to be considered by the council in its final form.
Oh, absolutely. They would
Under
have to-
any of those circumstances.
Any of those circumstances. The council would have to approve both contracts, and would, at that point, would have the option of maybe not approving one of those contracts.
Okay. Thank
You
you.
have, all your options are open.
Okay, we have two motions on the floor. Many of you know I've been on the Budget Committee the entire 8 years and the Transportation Committee the entire 8 years, and the second 4 years I was chair of this Transportation Committee. So I have a history of some experience with folks in the room here and where we went, and I wanted to have a real healthy interaction here, and I think everybody did an excellent job presenting their points of view on their issues. And I would like us to take a vote on Mr. Englander's motion first, since that was first presented, and then see if there's a vote for the second. All those,
Mr. Chair, are you going to take these Budget and Finance, take their own members, take a vote, and a separate vote for Transportation, or are you going to take it all together
The
from
joint
both committees?
committee, everybody.
it's a joint committee.
joint
And
committee?
as you can see,
Okay.
the Transportation Committee is well represented, as is the Budget. We're all here.
Okay.
And some of us are wearing two hats at once.
But if he wants to do that, I'll do 2 votes for the CAO's
No,
recommendation.
no, if I may. No, but wait, no, it's actually a sensible question. We only need to vote once, obviously. We're not going to vote differently depending on which committee we're sitting in, but there should be separate committee reports that the Budget and Finance Committee and the Transportation Committee should report separately.
Well, John White, City Clerk, actually, there could be a joint report, but it depends upon what you all do today. As far as separate votes, for those members that are on both committees, if there are separate reports, one for each committee, then you might have a separate vote on those reports.
Yes, and thank you,
For one
because
report.
just for the,
Do that.
Mr. Chair, I've seen it done both ways. I've seen us get a joint report to council, sometimes it's separate, so I just want to clarify up front which direction we're going.
That's right. Yeah. So we're going to go forward now with a vote. Is that okay? Okay, and we'll just start with Mr. Labange.
I vote yes for the CAO's report.
What are we voting on, Mr., which,
Your motion,
or the Parks
Rich?
motion?
This is the proposal to approve the CA report recommendations.
This is the Englander recommendation.
Okay, good. I vote yes.
Okay, fine. Mr. Koretz?
No.
Okay.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
No.
No.
So we have... Three noes,
And 4 yeses.
4 yeses. You said the yeses. Okay. So moved. That's the council action, the committee action. Will be presented again to the full council for a vote. This discussion will continue within the council, and council members will have an opportunity to continue this discussion even a step further. Okay. Thank you all for that. We're going to go back to the regular agenda of the Transportation Committee, and that is communications. Number 2, the mayor relative to the appointment of a new member to the Board of Taxi Commissioners.
You're still on duty. Go down and come back. And you can take this. Here.
Mr. Chair, this is item number 2 for the Transportation Committee. It's communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Ms. Andrea Martinez to the Board of Taxi Cab Commissioners, and she's here at the table for you.
Well, good afternoon, and you saw the democracy in action. You saw how different points of views and different groups interact and do it. When you go on this taxi commission, you'll have some issues, obviously, to deal with as well. Tell us about your background and why you want to be on this commission.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here. So, my background, I've been living in the city of LA for 10 years, fell in love the first moment, and I've been really interested in becoming more involved in city politics. And I used to work for a landscape designer, and she always, pushed us to become involved and go to community meetings. And so I did a lot of work through that with the LA River, and through that I've also become an avid cyclist in the city, which has gotten me more interested in transportation issues. So I'm interested in assisting, doing what I can to bring another point of view to transportation issues in the city, and including, perhaps incorporating pedicabs. I know I saw that on the agenda today, an RFP perhaps for pedicabs going out in the city. So those are some things that I'm interested in.
Let me ask you this. You're appointed by the mayor today,
Correct.
but then you have to write a resignation letter and hand it to the mayor of tomorrow.
Right in a few weeks, yes.
Yeah, how does this work within your brain as to what's the point of you going on this commission?
Well, I like what the existing mayor has already, some of the policies and initiatives that he's already put into place and started rolling. So I'd like to kind of continue those, for example, like making the taxi cabs more green.
I understand that.
Okay.
Have you been in discussions with the new mayor's people, too?
I haven't. I've been in contact with Garcetti's office, but understandably, they're quite busy over there.
Okay,
So-
as long as you know that your situation can be very successful and exciting, and you can be a member of the team or not.
I do, yeah, I understand that.
At this level, we can be enthused now
Exactly.
and get shot down, but I like where you're coming from, and I like what you just said. Makes a lot of sense to me, so I'm enthused, but colleagues, please.
I just know that the new mayor may select someone else, and this is the mayor, still the mayor until 11:59 on the 30th of June, so I move recommendation.
Okay, any comments, Mr. Lee?
I'll second that.
Okay, so moved. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
When's it go to council, like July 1st?
Goes to council Wednesday, June 19th.
June 19th, Wednesday's council. I'll see you then. Okay, look forward to it.
That brings us to item number 7 on the agenda, which is a Weezer Rosendahl motion relative to the presentation by Metro in coordination with MetroLink and LADOT on the proposal to lock the gates at Metro Red and Purple Line stations and to require the purchase of tap-enabled tickets. And we have MetroLink and Metro here for a quick presentation.
Hello, Metro.
Good afternoon. And, Mr. Chair, I know we've had a long meeting already. If we could ask, we could get a condensed presentation, if that's okay with you?
Yes, of course, let's do it. Go for it.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's David Sutton. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for TAP, and we'll speed right through this. Oh, technical difficulty. Let's see why I ought to change the pages. We're about ready to latch our gates at Union Station. We have a press conference slated for June 19th at 10:30. We hope you can all attend. This is the culmination of a lot of work of changing all of our paper products into a smart card, the TAP card, working with municipal agencies, working with LA DOT, and of course working with MetroLink.
Technical question.
Sir.
Is this a ticket?
Yes, sir, that's the MetroLink ticket that I'll go over when we
But we
cover our
can't
plan.
use it. We can't use it. This is just an example.
It's an example, correct.
Right, state law prohibits it.
Yes, sir.
You know why? The railroad influenced Sacramento, in 1890, and they said never ride for free.
Correct.
That's why. Okay.
We're going to implement this gate latching to improve our data, improve our security, and hopefully gain revenue that we're not currently getting. Why do we call it latching? We call it latching because although the gates are locked, they move when you tap them, so we call it latching. To properly use the fare product, you tap it at the tap target, either at a station validator or at the gate. This is an example of improved station validator placement. They used to be on the side of the station. This is 7th Metro, and now we have them in the customer's path to improve transfers. This is a regional product. This is much like the MetroLink ticket, it is a smart chip inside and enables our cash customers to transfer to the rail system and get through the gates. The TAP program partnership is growing. We have currently 10 partners, and by this time next year, hope to have another 15. This is an example of what we see at our gates. Pre-latch, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bars that you see here is what the gates look like when we don't latch the gates. The one on the far right is what happens when we do latch the gates. And what do we see? We see our ticket vending machine activity go up. We see our revenues go up, and we see our ridership go down slightly. Bob, would you like to take this one?
Good afternoon. My name is Robert Ternakis. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for MetroLink, and I've been heading up the TAP program, working very closely with the Metro team. And the ticket that was passed out is a sample of what the fare media looks like that we are going to be issuing. We've worked very closely with Metro to design this ticket as a very unique solution for our passengers. One of the challenges that we came across originally is each of the agencies had a different ticket vending machine or TVM. One was one vendor, the other one was another, and unfortunately, they did not communicate together. So we were able to come up with a specially designed ticket, which is a paper product that is dispensed out of our machines. And if you hold it up to the sunlight, and if there's a tap logo on it or up to the light, you'll see a chip that's embedded in there. So it's basically similar to the plastic card that Metro issues. And we have been able to load 115 of our ticket vending machines with these tap-enabled tickets. Our passengers have already started tapping without having the gates mandated and latching. And so far, the highest state that we've seen in one day is 10,000 taps. And hopefully by the end of this week, we will be ready to roll with every single ticket vending machine with all fares in preparation for the June 19th tap latching.
Great. Any questions or comments, colleagues? No. I just have one question not about this, but since you're here, Metro. Any homework done from Santa Barbara to Ontario?
I will hand that over to Patricia.
Come up real quickly. How are we doing on that Metro link? You know, I believe in regionalism is the answer to LAX and to the Southern California of having that Metro link into Ontario. It allows Anaheim
Yes, sir.
to filter in, allows the Inland Empire and the Palm Springs to filter in, really allows us to have a
That connectivity.
Metro link and get down.
Patricia Torres-Bruno with Metrolink. We did report to you before that we were going to work with LAWA, and we were looking at some short-term solutions, and there was some, in the short term, there was some thought about doing busing, but in the long term, which is what I think you want to look at, is a direct connection, and that is something that has to be a more in-depth study, and as a matter of fact, the San Bernardino Association of Governments is actually doing a study to look at all the
I want
connections.
non-stop direct, frequent, discounted flights out of Ontario.
Say that again.
And all cargo out of Ontario.
Say that again.
Non-stop direct, frequent, and discounted flights out of Ontario. So it's a direct link to everywhere like everybody else is. In today's age, we can go right online and find a cheap flight. And we can go to Ontario. We happen to live in Palm Springs or the Inland Empire or up there in the Metrolink area there, Santa Barbara, or even come zipping in from Anaheim. You don't have to clog up the 405. It's insane. So how fast are we going with this analysis? When will you have something to bring before us?
Well, I believe this is being led by Sandbag, so they're going through a procurement process. I think they're they're in the process of choosing a consultant to help them look at the study. But I would say maybe 12 to 18 months, maybe to go through the entire thing. But but they're not just looking at the airport connections. They're doing a big study on connectivity as well.
Okay, well, I just hope the word gets out beyond this room here as the politics of that issue comes up and regionalism is the solution. Maybe you can spend some time with our new mayor who's very much in favor of that regional solution as well. That would be helpful. Back to this.
Just real quick for that. You got 3 lines go to the Inland Empire. There's a freight line right next to the airport. The 2 are the Riverside line, the San Bernardino line. Is there a station stop in the city of Ontario right now for the San Bernardino Riverside line?
There's 2 stops near the airport. One is on the
They're
river.
not, but there's a freight line that's right next to the airport, which would be more ideal.
I think you're talking about the UP line.
Freight, yeah.
Yeah, there is a UP line. That's the Riverside line. That is, we have very limited service there because they have a capacity on the number of slots that are allowed there.
That's right, and there's a problem there. All right,
Yeah.
so keep working on, Mr. Rosendahl, I
So-
went out on your request to Ontario, drove around and work on it. I'll carry the ball a little, not as much as Mike Bonin will, knowing his footsteps. Thank you very much. Your testimony's been complete. Thank you.
All right, everybody, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming. I want to especially thank Metrolink, Metro, and the Mayor's Office for pushing this through. And we are, with the new gate latching issue, certainly moving in the direction that a lot of other places, cities, and regions have gone to. And so this is a very good thing. It's a common method of operation, and we're integrating our transportation systems here in Southern California, which is long due. So thank you all for your work. This was our effort to get the word out. I know that Metro and Metrolink is working with council offices to get the word out within our own e-blast, our own way of messaging. Mr. Labange, I know you have a great system, so I want to make sure that they're giving us the information so that we can e-blast it through. Thanks.
So note and file, right?
No one files.
Done. Last item?
Thank you.
Last item is item number 8, and it's the Labange Rosendahl motion instructing DOT to report relative to the feasibility cost and potential funding sources to develop a City of LA bicycle fleet for employees working at various locations in downtown.
Okay, we're going to move quickly on this. Mr. Labange?
Yes, have you been to a movie studio, Mr. Chairman? You been to a movie studio, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
What do they have on movie studio lots? Movies, but they also got bikes. And so you're an electrician, and you want to ride out to stage 40, you ride out stage 40, and then the carpenter needs to go down to the commissary, he rides that same bike. That's the concept. And by the way, I am the only councilman in this city who has a bike parked in City Hall, right next to my thing. I've used it 3 times, I will use it more, and I'm riding tonight from the William Mulholland Fountain, leading a community ride, so
Gay Pride.
you're very good, thank you so much. Pride, gay pride.
All right. All right. We're going to note and file this.
Well, are we going to do something about it?
We have a pending application with Metro's call for projects.
Great.
Wait, that's not the concept. Here's what I want. Hold this matter for the next committee. I want General Services, which has the fleet of vehicles, to buy 20 bikes, put 20 in City Hall, 20 in Piper Tech, and let's use them. That's what this is all about. Did you think about Piper Tech?
In 2009, we submitted an application with a number of locations. About 70% of them are the applications on your, or locations listed in your motion.
What's General Services
Piper
doing?
Tech
They have a, what do you call it, a motor pool? Let's hold this in here for the motor pool people.
We don't have a majority anymore left anyhow, so we will continue it in committee.
But I want the motor pool, like the Mark down does a great job.
He's asking for.
Mark does a great job down there.
The committee meets. I'll give him that report back. So the item is not note and file. It is continued to answer some of Mr. Labange's concerns and questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. That's very
Sure.
kind.
Is there any other public comment, any other discussion about any other issue? With that in mind, we don't hear anything. The meeting is adjourned.
We completed it.
Thank you.
Michelle.